Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking with soccer fan and immigration lawyer Michael O'Rourke. Michael, good to see you.
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
It's good. You've got the scarf on, the Deutschland scarf.
Yeah.
You're fluent in German. You like to follow the German soccer team. You've got over your shoulder there, I think I see a soccer ball in the background. So you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm just a casual fan, really.
So today we're talking about the World Cup checklist, and people might be wondering, why are you talking about the World Cup already? It doesn't take place until June of 2026. That will become clear as we go through this. Processing times for things like visitor visas, people that might find themselves inadmissible to come to Canada or the United States or Mexico might want to get their paperwork and stuff in order. Give Michael a call. Start the process sooner rather than later. Isn't that right, Michael?
Yeah, with what we expect to be unprecedented demand for U.S. and Canadian immigration for these World Cup matches in 2026, you don't want to wait till the last minute.
No, you don't. There's 48 countries. This is the first time they've increased the amount of countries participating in the World Cup. It's going up to 48 different countries, which means if you're from one of the host, if you're not from one of the host countries, there's a very good chance out there that you want to get your visitor visa in line now, because there's going to be a big lineup behind 47 other nations besides your own. So we're going to touch on Mexico a little bit, but of course we do concentrate on Canadian and U.S. immigration, but we will have stuff from Mexico coming up at the end. And the reason for that is because it's kind of a different World Cup this time. It's not in one country. It has taken place in other multiple countries before, but this time it's three countries: the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. You can see the host cities there. One thing I want to touch on later, Michael, I'm going to hit you with, is what happens if you want to go to all of you. Want to go to Atlanta, then Toronto, and then to Guadalajara, and back and forth and stuff like that. So there's the list of all the different cities that people might be visiting. We're going to jump in and start with visiting the USA first. Michael, if you're a Canadian or, and this is interesting, a Bermudian, certain rules apply to you. What are they?
Everybody forgets about the Bermudians, but those are the only two nationalities that do not require a visa. They're entirely visa exempt from coming into the United States. They don't even need an electronic system for travel authorization, otherwise known as an ESTA. They're allowed to come into the U.S. for 6 months as visitors for pleasure. And they have the e-ticket, so to speak, the easiest way in.
Right. No visitor visa required, no ESTA. They can just walk on in, provided there aren't some other things that we're going to go over in a minute. Let's carry on to our next slide. The rest of the world. If you're not from Canada or from Bermuda, some other rules apply to you. What are they, Michael?
Yeah, so the rest of the world is sorted out into three groups, really. Visa waiver countries, which are most of the EU, New Zealand, Australia, UK, Japan, and a few other countries. They have something called visa waiver, and they're allowed short stays of up to 90 days as long as they get an ESTA. If they're not part of or if you're not part of a visa waiver country, if you're not a citizen, then you have to go and get a standard U.S. tourist visa, a B2, to come in for this type of a sporting event. There is a third group. We'll talk about it more, but they are the state sponsors of terror that Washington has designated as being undesirable nations. So getting a visa from one of those countries is going to be very difficult, if not impossible.
Okay, so to recap there, we have the visa waiver countries, and you can check online for if you're from a visa waiver country to the United States. Even if that's true, Michael, they still need the ESTA.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and that can be applied for online.
Yes, and my tip to save you some money is apply at the official site for ESTA. It's esta.cbp.gov or esta.dhscbp.gov, something like that.
Okay.
But other ESTA providers will just charge you more fees to get the ESTA.
Okay, good tip. Reasons for inadmissibility to the U.S. You already mentioned one, which is national security. We'll touch on the state sponsors of terror nations. But there are other reasons you might be inadmissible to the United States. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this video now is because if you are or think you may be inadmissible to the United States, generally it comes under criminal activity if you have a criminal record in your past or something. You want to start this process now to try and get that inadmissibility removed. Well, I guess you won't have it removed, Michael, but you can get a stay and get a visa so you can enter the U.S.
Exactly. So if there is inadmissibility in your background, we're mostly talking about criminal activity. You can get a waiver of inadmissibility by applying for a visa at a U.S. consulate, or if you're a Canadian, applying for a waiver at using eSafe and going to a port of entry. But such things as crimes involving moral turpitude, drug possession, fraud and misrepresentation, documentary insufficiency, those are things that may or may not be able to be waived. And usually obtaining a visa along with a waiver can be a lengthy process.
Okay, so if people want to get their ducks in a row on that, contact you, get the appropriate paperwork put together, and then take it from there.
Exactly. Let me just touch on health for one moment.
Sure.
Usually for the US, health inadmissibility is only for seriously contagious diseases, and that usually just boils down to active tuberculosis.
Okay.
Prior removals from the United States that could have invoked a ban of certain years of visiting the United States. This is complex. You should definitely talk to a lawyer about that. And then national security issues. If you are from a state sponsor of terror country, and those right now are just Cuba, North Korea, Iran, or Syria, it will be an uphill battle to get a U.S. visa.
Okay, uphill battle, not impossible, but it's not great.
Not impossible, but for instance, for Iranians trying to come to the United States, we usually see lengthy administrative processing and background checks. When the visas are issued, they're issued for a single entry only. So if it is your dream to come to the World Cup and see it in Kansas City, then plan well ahead.
Okay, and that goes for anyone who might have some kind of a background. You got like the criminal activity. If you have a DUI, a drunk driving conviction in your background, something like that, don't just take it for granted that you might be able to get into the United States. Give Michael a call and make sure you get proper advice. Let's carry on to visiting Canada. A lot of the rules are the same, but they're not exactly the same. So let's take it from the American perspective, Michael. If you're from the USA and you want to come up to Toronto to see a game, what gives?
So prepare to spend a lot of money, but I live in Toronto, so I can say that. U.S.
On
citizen,
parking especially, but anyway,
my
yes,
gosh,
go ahead.
parking is insane here. I think it's worse than New York City.
I know.
So if you're a U.S. citizen, you do not require a visitor visa to come to Canada. You don't require an ETA, which is electronic travel authorization. You can simply board a plane or drive over the border, and with your U.S. passport, you'll be able to get a stay of 6 months. If you're a U.S. permanent resident, legal permanent resident, or green card holder, you can also come to Canada and you'll get a 6-month entry. You just have to bring your green card and your country of origin passport.
Okay, good news for the people from the U.S. As for the rest of the world, we don't call it in Canada the visa waiver. We use the words visa exempt.
Exactly. So there are quite a few visa exempt countries. I don't know the exact number right now, but I would say it's probably a good 40, 50, maybe even 60 countries. Most of Europe, EU, UK.
Right, and we have the ETA. That the U.S. has ESTA, Canada has the ETA. I kind of think of them as almost like visa light.
Exactly. They're still going to do a background check, but participating countries in the visa exemption program, they can apply for this ETA, and they'll get an answer usually within 72 hours if they're permitted to travel to Canada. If you have a Canadian visa, you do not need an ETA.
Excellent. Okay, moving on. Reasons for inadmissibility. I'm struggling with that word today.
Inadmissibility.
Inadmissibility to Canada. Very similar to the United States, and in fact, probably most countries in terms of your background, criminal activity, things like this. But go into it, and especially touch on this. I threw this in because Canada makes a note of this, but I don't want people to freak out. Inadmissible family member.
Right. So Canada does generally have the same types of immigration inadmissibility. However, DUI, driving under the influence of either alcohol or drugs, any charges related to that are taken very seriously on this side of the border and can make you inadmissible. So if that is in your background, even if, say, you're from New York State and you got the first DUI warning ticket, which isn't even a criminal offense, it can be treated very differently here. So that is something that you must consider if that's in your background.
Okay.
And say you and the kids are on your way to Toronto, you've got plenty of money to pay for the parking rates here, and you're at the Peace Bridge between Buffalo and Fort Erie. Dad's inadmissible. That can make the whole family inadmissible coming to Canada. So it is something that you have to consider, and criminal inadmissibility seems to be broader than what is in the United States.
Okay, and we have here the national security stuff. Does Canada treat it? Is it the same countries, the same state sponsors of terror outlook?
No, not necessarily. They don't subscribe to the state sponsors of terror. That's a totally American invention. Iranian citizens are able to get visas. There will probably be greater background checks for some nationalities, they say North Koreans. But in general, Canada has its own geopolitical intrigues. So, depending on how things are going politically, some visa operations might take longer than others, so some visa applications.
Right, and it's funny you say that because this is still a while off. If people are watching this, make sure there hasn't been an update or something has happened in the world that has changed things for particular nationalities. Make sure to contact Michael. So we'll carry on to Mexico. Michael, I know that you head up Pace Law Firm's Latin America division when it comes to immigration. Talk a little bit about Mexico. People might want to go to Monterrey to see a game.
Yeah, exactly. Monterrey is a lot of fun. Great food, by the way, just telling you. But Mexico is a bit more easy to enter. There are three different ways that you can come into Mexico without needing a visa. Mexico has its own list of visa exemptions. Many countries, but I can't give you a number,
Right.
are on this visa exempt list. However, if you are from a visa required country and you possess a valid visa for the United States, Canada, one of the Schengen zone countries, Japan, or the United Kingdom, you can use that in lieu of a Mexican visa. Or if you're a permanent resident of the US, Canada, one of the Schengen zone countries, Japan, Peru, Chile, Colombia, or the United Kingdom, you are considered visa exempt as well in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's no surprise. Mexico's a huge tourist destination, so they keep it pretty, you can get in there fairly easily. Let's put it that way.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
But
pay attention.
exactly. We put Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, of course, in the news big time right now. Go into a little bit of this.
So Mexico has its own version of ESTA or ETA. The Mexican one is called the Sistema de Transacción Electrónica. I know I'm butchering the pronunciation. I always do. But the SAE. And citizens currently just of Russia, Ukraine, or Turkey have to apply for an SAE in advance of flying to Mexico.
Okay. And I think that about wraps it up for us, except for one thing. And this is the one I wanted to throw at you. I threw this at the end. What if I want to go back and forth? So we've talked about getting into Canada, getting into the US, getting into Mexico. What if I want to get into all three and I want to come and go as I please?
Well, it's really going to boil down to your passport. So, say you have a French passport, nobody's going to really hold you up unless there's some inadmissibility issues. But if you have a passport from, for instance, Nigeria, you're going to need a Canadian visa. and a U.S. visa. If you have one of those two, you won't necessarily need a Mexican visa, but depending on your nationality, it's going to really change how you have to approach this. For instance, if you're a citizen of Russia and you apply for the SAE to Mexico, you get one entry on that SAE. So if you want to go, say there's a game in Guadalajara one Saturday and a game in Monterrey the next Saturday, you're going to have to apply for an SAE again to come in. Plus, you'll need US and Canadian visas.
Right.
But if
Yep.
you don't go to the U.S., if you go to the U.S. and you get your U.S. visa, then you won't need the SAE. So it's just a matter of what are you planning to do. Try and nail it down as soon as possible and figure out how you're going to do it and what your travel is going to look like. The less you cross borders, the better. Jim.
Right. When it comes to the inadmissibility thing, like let's say I get my waiver from the U.S., so I've got some kind of a conviction in the past. You work hard with me to sort it out. You get me into so I get that waiver. I get into the U.S. If I go to Canada from there and then try and get back into the U.S., is that waiver still good?
Yeah, usually the waiver is good for 5 years, but
Oh, okay.
the idea that you bring up that you have some sort of criminal inadmissibility that would keep you from entering the U.S., the Canadians might look at that and say, well, then you're inadmissible to Canada. So,
Right. You might have a couple of waivers in your passport or something.
right, exactly. You might
Yeah.
need to get criminal rehabilitation in Canada if the crime has been completed and all of the sentencing requirements within are at least 5 years ago. But if not, then you might need something called a temporary resident permit. So the Canadian system is a little bit more tricky dealing with criminality. It really depends on how long things have elapsed. So again, if this is in your background, talk to somebody who's competent to deal with it. It's difficult to deal with on your own, but it could really hamper your plans in the future.
Right. And I mean, with, 48 countries coming to North America to watch these games, there's lots of people out there, lots of different things have happened in their past. I'm sure some of this applies to people watching. Be sure to contact Michael at mo'rourke@pacelawfirm.com. He'll no doubt be able to sort you out. He might not be able to solve the problem, but he'll certainly give you the good guidance. Michael, thanks a lot for taking the time to do this. I'm sure we'll be talking about travel plans for people in the World Cup coming up in the next several months or a couple of years. But thanks a lot for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds great, Sean. You take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.